So I'm here today with Marilee Sears. Marilee works with women, helping them to really reclaim their sexuality and to explore what does it mean to have a sense of sexuality that is all yours without abandoning your values or anything that really matters to you. Also, Marilee has the unique distinction of being the best friend that I have ever had. So, we are going to have a delightful conversation around sensuality, pleasure, and values. Marilee, thanks for being here.
Oh, Dawn, thank you so much for having me here, for letting me be a part of your life. It's so my pleasure.
So, as we dive in, Marilee, I would love to just start off by hearing your story. How did you get to this delightful place?
Oh, I will try not to bore you guys, but I will tell you it definitely is my story that brought me here. I grew up in a really religious household. I was raised Mormon, and I remember some very distinct things from growing up that were views about sex, and the majority of what I learned about sex all was based on rules. I tell the story of when I was taught about what was allowed. This was allowed before marriage. There was a church class when I was about 12 years old and a stick figure that was on the chalkboard. And the teacher drew a line underneath the chin and then a line above the shoulders and said, "This is what's allowed before marriage. Kissing, necking, anything below the neck is not allowed. Anything below the shoulders is not allowed before marriage." And just being like, oh, okay. And I had friends at that age of 12 or 13 that were most definitely doing more than that. I hadn't been lucky enough to have a boyfriend at that time, but it was like, got it. I got the rules. And that's what I got was the rules. And so I felt like my sexuality growing up was too big for the rules that were given me. It was too big for that stick figure. Believe me, I tried to follow my best to follow the stick figure guidance. I did not um, follow the stick figure guidance totally, but I felt like, okay, got it. I was given the rules. Too big. My sexuality is too big for that. And then I got married and kind of got switched from like, okay, a good girl doesn't to a good wife should. And suddenly my sexuality went from being too big for my church's rules to feeling like it was too small for my spouse's desires and expectations. And I recognized that there was never really a time when my sexuality felt like it was just perfectly enough for me. It felt like, I call it the Goldilocks syndrome. It was, too much when I was growing up, too much for the rules, too little for the partnership, and never felt like it was just right for me. And it wasn't until I was even in my 40s before I realized that my sexuality could be just right for me. So I guess I'll start with that there's a lot more, things that just impacted and things that made me realize um, I never really felt like my sexuality truly was my own. It felt like it was a reflection of rules that were given and then a reflection of my partner's desires, but having that space to really start to think, okay, what would my sexuality look like if it was truly owned by me was a conversation that didn't start until I was in my 40s.
Wow. It's such a common story. And, I before we are done today, we will definitely get into what does it look like, and even more importantly, how does it feel to have a sense of your sexuality, like your sexuality, all yours. Before we go down that path, I want to slow us down and sort of like back up to some of those moments. So you talked about growing up in a religious household. I did not grow up in a religious household, and yet I believe that I got many of the same messages. I mean, no one drew a stick figure and a line, but this idea that there are rules around sexuality that, if not followed, come with consequences was certainly communicated. And so I'm curious if you could talk about some of the impact of experiencing this is a realm of life that comes with rules, and I don't naturally feel like I follow into them. So, like, what was it like to either cram yourself into them and to contend with the impact of not fitting them?
I just, one, felt like, so, having the rules, knowing this is what was expected of me, and then having desires that expanded beyond those rules, one made me feel like, why am I quote unquote dirty? Why am I this way? And I think that was secondary shame. There was shame that happened even before that. Even before the stick figure, even before there was shame even before that. But I think just recognizing this is what's expected of you. You're either not wanting or not meeting what that expectation is. There was just continual hiding, shame. What's wrong with me? When I discovered, for example, like pleasure for myself, when I discovered that my body had pleasure, I remember just being like, oh my gosh, what is this? And what's wrong with me?
Yeah.
So around the age of 13, 14, 15 years old, being like, oh my gosh, I get so turned on at times. Oh my gosh, in the shower, this feels so good. And what's wrong with me? And if I could go back to my journals from that time, there are so many journal entries of like, I'm just recommitting to being a better person because I should not be experiencing pleasure like this. I shouldn't be having these desires. Like I really felt, honestly, I think I felt broken. And I think I felt broken because there was abuse that happened earlier in my childhood, that it was like, oh, these things this is the way I took it. This is the story that I laid upon abuse that happened in early childhood. Is like, wow, this awakened desires that are unhealthy. And now what am I supposed to do with that? How is it that, like, again, so here's what happened and the story that comes upon it, that we put upon it. I can now recognize that so much of the shame was the story that was put on top of what actually happened to me. And so, do you mind if I share a little bit about that? Because
Please.
again, this is not a unique experience to me. It's not a unique experience to those that grow up in purity culture or in a religion. It's really expansive of how much this impacts us culturally, just how much this is propagated over and over again. And I'll share a few examples of that. But when I was younger, I was playing with some young people, and I'll just say that just for like be respectful of like I was playing with some other young people, and it came about that they were all boys that I was playing with, and ultimately, I would say what happened was unhealthy curiosity. Um, I ended up without my clothes on. They were looking at my body. I do think I felt embarrassed or just uncomfortable. That's the word. I think I felt uncomfortable with the situation. And then whether I was going to school and hearing about, child abuse, sexual abuse, and hearing the message of like, if someone tries to do this, you yell, you run, and you tell somebody. And I didn't yell, I didn't run, and I didn't tell somebody. And even now, being older and wiser, I can say, I don't know if I would have wanted to tell somebody because I love a number of these people, and not knowing, again, like they also were children, feeling like almost a sense of protection of like, did they mean to do it? Was this bad? Was this really abuse? Like there was so much conflict that happened. And over, the story was just like, I did it wrong. Why am I still, like, why didn't I yell? Why didn't I scream? Why didn't I run? Also, why am I not telling anybody now? Also, when I did start to, in church meetings and things, when they would talk about our bodies, it was like, okay, you don't let anybody do this. I'm like, but I did let somebody do this. Again, I let somebody do this. I carried this shame. Forget the fact that I was only 5 or 6 years old. Like, to feel like I had so much shame. And I remember being in the bathroom at one point, taking a shower, coming out of the shower and looking at myself in the full length mirror and just thinking, this time I was probably about 9, just thinking, what would it even feel like to not have so like all this hurt? At the time, I don't think I knew the name was shame, but not to have all this hurt about my body and so much like not feeling like it was mine, just feeling like I was doing it wrong and I had done it wrong. So add to that, like the next layer of it was just every message I got somehow felt like I was doing it wrong. And then when I was about the age of 12 or so, again in a church meeting, this was prior to the stick figure, I believe. A, a man at church in my Sunday school class taught us that if someone was sexually assaulting you, that you should ask them to kill you. And I was outspoken. I love that despite having the messages and the trauma that I did from my youth, I think about the time I was 12, 13 years old, I started to recognize that I did have value and I did have a voice. And I had really good friends that would point out things that I would say or messages that I would repeat. And they'd be like, that is messed up, Marilee. Like, no, that is not true. Like, they really, I felt like I had advocates in my friends that helped me to see that maybe these messages that I had just adopted and soaked in and absorbed as though they were mine, one, maybe they weren't really mine. And two, maybe they weren't really true. And so I started to have my own voice. And so I pushed back with this teacher and I said, are you kidding me that if I'm being sexually assaulted, that I should be asked to be killed? And he was like, Marilee, he's like, you're being really disrespectful. Like, I'm going to call your parent. You know, I'm going to call your parents and let them know how disrespectful you're being. And I said, go right ahead. Because I felt like this was an argument I was going to win, right? Like, this is a ridiculous argument to tell me that if I'm being sexually assaulted, I should instead ask to be killed. So later that afternoon, I'm washing dishes next to my mom after we have our Sunday dinner, and the phone rings. This is back before caller ID. I go and I pick up the phone. It's Brother Berger, from my Sunday school teacher. I can tell from his voice, and he asked to speak to my parents. So my mom is the one there. I hand the phone to her. She goes in the other room. This is back when we had corded phones. The cord line was like 20 feet long, but she goes into the other room, so I can't hear the conversation. I continue to wash the dishes, and she comes back to the sink after the conversation, and she said, "No, Brother Berger told me that you were being really disrespectful today." And I said, yeah, did he tell you what he said? And she said, yeah, he did. And I said, so he told you that he was teaching us that if we were being sexually assaulted, we should ask to be killed. My mom looked at me and said, Marilee, wouldn't you rather die? And I just remember thinking, like, my little heart was just squashed because I was like, it's already like, I have no worth. Like, if you had known what had happened to me, you're telling me I should have asked to be killed. I was 5, I was 6, I didn't even know. Does that make sense? And it was, it, it just felt like my worth was only how much I protected my virginity, how well I protected my body. Felt like it over and over again. Even when I asked for clarification, even when I was like, really? It was like, yeah, that's your worth. Yes, that is how much we cherish you. Yes, that is your value, is how much you protect your body, your innocence, your virginity, is how much you are valued as a woman, as a person. And that was such a devastating message to hear time and time again. And to say, like, this doesn't just happen in families and it doesn't just happen in church. I was watching I was watching a judge show the other day. It was actually an old rerun of the People's Court, and the woman that was there was complaining that her windshield had been shattered. She was at a party and her windshield had been shattered because someone got upset and hit her windshield as she was driving away from the party. And she shares as part of the story, as she's like at this case, she shares that when the windshield shattered, there was glass all over her. So she went into the bathroom. And one of the young men that was at the party followed her into the bathroom and followed her in, shut the door, and locked the door. And she said, he was helping me at first with washing and getting the glass off of me. So I didn't think anything of it. And she said, until I went to get out, and then I saw the door was locked, and he came and stood in front of the door. And the luckily nothing happened. I'll just say that. Luckily nothing happened. She got out of the bathroom. But the judge on the show actually looks at this young woman and says, how stupid can you be to go into a bathroom with a young man and not notice he locked the door behind you? And I just thought, how are we supposed to escape these awful messages that we get? Like, no matter, nope, it was your fault. No, it was, how could you not have protected yourself more? And I was just like, these are the kind of messages we get that are so toxic that when we go to people, and I mean, she wasn't even going for that reason. She was going about her broken windshield. But I hear stories over and over again from women and from clients that are like, this happened to me. And then when I went for help, instead of getting help, instead of getting just validation, the response was, how could you have allowed that? Or how could you have put yourself in that situation? Which is such a toxic, traumatic, terrible response to get when someone has been violated.
Yes. And first of all, and you know this, I'm so sorry that happened. And I I agree with you that whether or not you grew up in a particular environment, these sorts of messages are ubiquitous. This idea that um, if something happens to you, that one, potentially your fault, and two, that you have been tainted. And so, what I'd like to hear from you is like what it was like to navigate adolescence, your young adult years with that experience. I mean, you said I looked in the mirror and I wondered what would it be like to live without this pain, without this hurt. And so to the best of your ability, what was it like to live with it?
I would say to the, I'll do the best of my ability, and I'll also, verbalize it the best way that I can. I just think I lived my life very, very guarded, very guarded. And so I went from a place of just assuming that everybody was going to do the worst to me, if that makes, and so not ever feeling comfortable. And in a way, I can look at it and see the, I almost hate to say this, I can almost say, like, I can see the positive side of this coin. I assumed the worst from everybody. And because of that, very little abuse continued to happen to me as I got older. But I think I also assumed the worst from everybody. And that's not a wonderful way to live life. And I think I also sought somebody who would be my protector. And there's a way of, I think partnership is beautiful, but I think when you seek a protector first, then you're coming more from the victim stance, from a place of really being an equal. And so I think one is that I just didn't see myself as maybe worthy or capable of dating, because I felt like I can't trust myself. My sexuality is too big. So I just decided to essentially deny it, focus on school instead, focus on studies, focus on other things besides dating. Um, and then as I got older and actually did start to date, I essentially married the first person that I dated because, again, I just felt like, okay, I have these sexual desires. Went a little bit farther than what the stick figure said. Therefore, I'm kind of committed to this person. Like, the shame kept me in the commitment. And it was really not a healthy relationship at all. But I think it was just, it was a life of trying to check the boxes and constantly feeling not good enough. And so I think that's just the way that my life was, not just in my adolescence and teenage years, but throughout my 20s and 30s. And it's something that I'm still working through now, right? Is like, how can I make sure that everybody, like, nobody finds fault with what I'm doing? And the truth is, there's just not a way that that's possible. I guess I'm starting to accept that now. Over the last several years, I've started to accept that. But growing up, it just felt like constant anxiety to recognize that no matter what, I was not measuring up. In high school, I was not measuring up to the cool girls. At church, I was not measuring up to the epitome of who I was supposed to be as a young woman. Uh, in my parents' eyes, I was falling short. Like, it just felt like no matter where I looked, there was some place where I was definitely not good enough.
And then you married the first guy you dated and
Yes.
stepped into an environment where, in your words, now my sexuality isn't big enough. So first it was too big.
Yeah.
Now it's not big enough. So what I hear trending on repeat is this sense of being externally referenced rather than internally referenced. And, like, so we can go one of two places now, and I will let you choose. Uh, If if you think there's something to say about it, I'd love to hear what was that transition like of going from like I'm too much to I'm not enough, and sort of what those years were like. Or we could dive right into reclaiming internal difference.
Oh, let's jump into the reclaiming, because I was like, they've heard enough of like myself, and I know that there's so many people that have had it worse, and I'm just saying, none of us gets through this unscathed. I have yet to meet a woman, those that grow up in sex positive households, those who do not grow up with religious conditioning, those who have married wonderful partners. There is still there's always a way, a message, something that has been picked up. So none of us come through this unscathed. And so I would love to jump into the reclamation. Let's
Great.
go there.
Then
Let's go
let's
there.
go to the reclamation, right? Which is really this pivotal time in your life where you said, It doesn't work for me to keep checking in out there, out there, out there. Let me check a box. Did I meet your standard? And instead, you started going, well, what's my standard? What's my preference? What's my value system? So, what inspired that? What what enabled it? Right? Because there's inspiration
Mhm.
and there's follow through and action, and we know they are not the same thing. So, I'm actually curious about both. What let you know that it would be possible? And
Mhm.
what allowed you to do the work of reclaiming?
Well, I wish I could give you a more inspired, exciting answer, but I think I will have to say angst is what inspired me to recognize there was something different. I was going through a really difficult time in my 18-year marriage of my partner stating that his needs weren't being met. And I felt like I had expanded my sexuality as much as felt true to me, to the point where parts didn't feel true to me. I was like, oh, going to leave a few things ambiguous there, but it just, my sexuality felt like it was constantly being pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed. And I had been so disconnected from myself, my sexuality, looking at it as a reflection of other things, that it was constantly looking for external validation. But there's a piece in us that when we are pushed to a point, it our body knows. Like I had been so disconnected from my body, but yet my body would not disconnect fully. I look at it as as a most beautiful protection of, like, yeah, my body, I think my body's pretty incredible with the things that it was willing to put up with. It was like, I will not let you lose you, Marilee, right? Like you can push, you can make, you can force, but there is a core here that is still you. We're not letting go of that, despite how much people that the person that you love most, is pushing you to expand beyond that. And and so I asked him for a pause in our sexual relationship, and that request wasn't granted. And from that point, I was like, okay, I have to look at this relationship not working because I know that this doesn't feel good to me. And I think it honestly got that bad. Like on so many reasons, on a friendship level, the relationship was so good. But on a sexual level, it got that uncomfortable. It was like, no, it's not worth the fact that we have a great friendship. It's not worth, like, it is not worth me giving up me and who I am in my core. um I have to know who I am. I have to have the space. I have to have the discovery. I have to have the inquiry to know who I really am. And so with that came podcasts and books, and eventually the training that you and I met in together. um just that place of being able to say, what do I need, not in conversation, not as a reflection of someone else, but just me, Marilee, on my own. Who am I really? What do I really want? And in so many ways, I felt like that 11-year-old girl all over again. Like I felt like the answers were not really obvious, but over time, the answers came. And I would just like hold on to each one of those answers, because at first I really was looking at the books and the podcasts and the trainings to be like they had the answers. And what I realized over time is that these books and podcasts and trainings had ideas, but I was the only one who had the answers. And so I could take those ideas into me, into my thought, into my body, and then let them see how it fit with my body. And so it was a combination of having more and better information and having a more deeper connection with my body. And I think that's one of the things that we as women don't have, is that we have access now to all this information, podcasts, interviews, incredible coaches, and knowing that we're the best expert when it comes to our sexuality, when it comes to our intuition, when it comes to our body. We are the experts. And so all the best information out there does not replace the answers that we have within ourselves and how it fits for us. So for me, it came from angst, but it's continued because of how good it feels to be connected to myself, to be connected to my truth, to know that when I'm having a debate with someone, well, I wouldn't say debate, like when I had a disagreement with someone, and I no longer am sitting there saying like, no, maybe they're right. I'm sitting there being like, wait, no, what I'm saying feels right to me. Like, it's okay that they disagree. The fact that we disagree doesn't mean that I'm wrong. The fact that we disagree means that we're two different people, and that I get to be really sure in who I am as a person. And as I recognize that over and over again, I just get to be more and more sure of who I am as a person. I I love that. It's a connection I never want to lose again.
Wow, that's so great. Okay, so One, thank you. It was so vulnerable, so honest, and so human. Like, I think that one, too many of us are looking for the sign to like whack us over the head and say, like, "Duh, like here's the inspiration, you can now move forward." And what you said, which I think really warrants highlighting, it was angst that brought you in, and something that has come up a couple of times in this series is that symptoms are the sign. You know, our bodies are communicating with us constantly, and they will get our attention in any way that is effective. And so, if we could just highlight, normalize, and embrace that anxiety or depression or pain or digestive symptoms, whatever the symptom, headaches, these are not a thing to be suppressed and shoved to the side because they are often the invitation calling us into deeper and right relationship with self, right?
Yes.
And then I love this other piece that you said. So, you know, your attention turns, right? Like you start paying attention to this other world, sex positive, sensuality positive, podcast, books, interviews, swan dive into the 700-hour certification training. And that was just another reflection of externally referencing something. And so it was more supportive, more nourishing information, but it was still the same pattern of externally referencing something. And your ultimate answer, as I understand it, came from the courage to try it on and then shift your focus inside and say, does this fit me? Right? Am I willing to let go of what doesn't fit me and keep what does fit me? And then slowly curate your own menu, weave your own tapestry. Like this piece is mine. And I know because I tried it, I found out. I'm now, you know, like I think that as women, it can be so easy to dive into something that becomes performative, right? It's like, okay, well, I'm
Mhm.
supposed to be sex positive. Now I'm watching these things. Oh, want to use a toy? Sure, we can use a toy. I'm supposed to make noise. Great, I can make noise. But there's no authenticity in that. And you've just laid out a pathway that has you at the center of it.
Well, that's the only way the map works, right? Is if we're at the center of it versus like, where, how do I get there? What do I try? And this is the beautiful thing about when we are at the center of the path, the center of the map, is wherever we're at right now is perfect. And where do we get to go? Wherever the hell we want.
Wherever you damn well please.
That's right. That's right.
And
And
if you take a turn that doesn't feel so good, turn around.
yes, and
Don't think
that's where this knowing when how to recognize the shame for me, shame was the biggest barrier that I needed to really reclaim my sexuality, and that's why, like I call myself a shame-free sexuality coach, is because for me, shame was the biggest barrier, and now I can recognize that I can take a detour, not necessarily like something, and not feel shameful about it. Um, I can explore different things and be like, "Ooh, not for me," and say like discovery, like there's I was I tuned into myself? Was I honest with myself? As long as I was doing those things, great. If there's shame, like I'm using this in quotes because I don't know if that's a word that I would use any longer. If I wasn't listening to myself, then I have a conversation with myself. Like that's the times when I'm like, okay, what is there to be learned here? Right? How would I do that differently? Because it's all about getting to know myself more. Whereas what I found with shame is that shame just disconnects you more and more and more from who I really am, who we really are. Yeah.
so Marilee, shame is it's a huge word. It means a lot of things to a lot of people. And I'm going to go out on a limb and just say, if you're watching and listening, whatever it means to you, go with it. Right? Because it's like the nitty gritty. maybe not so important as the experience of it. What I'm curious to hear about is what are some of the tools and practices that you use to actually metabolize that shame and to move forward? Like I think of shame almost as like disconnecting from a part of ourselves, and the process of metabolizing it is like reintegrating, becoming more whole. How did you do that?
Well, I'll do my best to describe it. I would say how I recognize shame now, because it's an easy way for me to recognize it, is whenever I hear myself being like, I should have, and usually in response to something I did or wish that I would have handled differently. So whenever I hear or feel myself saying that, like I shouldn't have, or I should have, like should is the shame word for me for some reason. It's just, it works for me. I'm not saying that's true for everybody, but it's telling me that like I should have been different. And it's indicating that I wish I would have done things differently. And so I just tend to actually write those questions down and say like, is that true? And I'm saying that, yeah, I guess it can be a reflection of Byron Katie's work, but I'm actually just asking myself that, like, should I have done that differently? It's like, okay, let's say I go on a date, and at the end of the date, I enjoyed the person's company, but really only see us as friends. And he asks if he can, give me a kiss. And I am a little bit frozen, don't really know how to respond in a way that doesn't have me even more uncomfortable. So I acquiesce and say, sure, even though I really don't want to kiss this person. And so then I go to my car. I'm like, oh, I disconnected from myself. I wasn't true, right? Like all this stuff. I'm like, I should have said no. And I'll sit there and be like, should I? Should I have said no? Like, and I can sit there with compassion. Like, I guess I always add compassion to the should. Like, is that the best? And it's like, I can see why I would make that same decision again. If I go out on a date next week or in a month and I'm in a very similar scenario, I can see how I might make that exact same decision again. And there's so many things that impact it, right? How safe I feel, how much, like, how confident I feel, how much I don't want to kiss that person, like all of these things. And in each of those, I can still come from back to a place of like, you did it perfectly, Marilee. You did it the best you knew how at that time. And let's think for a moment, if we're put in that exact same situation next week or next month, is there something that you would like to do differently? Is there a way that would be more true to you? And sometimes the answer is like, no, I did that the best I knew how. And sometimes I'm like, okay, I've come up with a few responses. Something like, you know what? I really enjoyed this. I want to just sit with that. Like, and I know I haven't been able to use that line yet, Dawn. No, I have not. So let's just say that. Like, I want to claim that. I have that as a possibility. Have I used that possibility on my map yet? I have not. Have I kissed a person on a date that I was like, probably would have preferred not to kiss them? Yes, I have done that too. And I'm just saying, like, all of these things are possibilities. And I recognize that my entire life is going to be an opportunity to know myself better. That doesn't, I will not get to a place where I did it perfectly. So, say the quote by Glennon Doyle, though, it's like, the goal of our life is to disappoint as many people as necessary so that we don't disappoint ourselves. And that's what I'm constantly trying to get closer to, is how can I be the most true to myself? And part of me to being true to myself is that I'm a very kind and compassionate person to myself and to others. And so I almost take that as a dare I say this, like I probably take that into the equation a little bit. If someone's like a cocky, I think I would so much more easily say, oh, actually, I'm going to take I want to think about it, versus someone who I feel like has been really vulnerable and asked me if they could kiss me. Like, I'm just saying there's no right answer. There's no one right answer. I just get to do what's best, the best that I know how in each and every moment, and then sit with myself and say, okay, like, good job doing the best you knew how. Is there anything that you wish you would have done differently? Okay. And then that all really comes down to like being based off of the values that I recognize as being core to me. And I make those values the foundation to which I compare each experience, how I live my life, because that's my touchstone that I can refer back to, versus like, how comfortable do I feel right now? Like, I feel like my values that I've discovered for myself become my cornerstone that I keep going back to and referencing to make sure that I'm being the most true to myself, especially when it comes to my sexuality.
Great. Okay. We're going to talk about values in a minute. Before we do, I'm going to recap. I'm going to highlight some of the things that you said and give you the opportunity to add or clarify if needed. Okay, so what I heard you say is that compassion is the key to metabolizing shame, and that your definition of perfect is doing the best that you could at that time, which doesn't preclude you from asking, would I like to do better in the future? Is there a better, right? But really, what I heard in what you just shared is that perfect is just the best that I had with what was available. If I am a more resourced person in the future, if I'm in a different context in the future, if I'm in a different situation, there might be a different answer to it. But there is no right or wrong. That's this arbitrary standard out there, right? It's a very internally referenced place. It's my perfect. Does that does that
You
capture
said that so well, Dawn. You said that so well. Yes, that you captured that so well.
it?
Yes.
And then you said, and this is the part I want to explore, values become your North Star, not comfort, not necessarily consideration for other people, but your values. And I know you have a workshop coming up in November around understanding curating values. You and I have talked about this before, and I want us to take a dive into it right now because I think what there is to do is to distinguish rules and values. So, first of all, tell us, how are they different? And then how does one create their own code of values?
Well, thank you so much for asking this, Dawn, because I'll say two things about rules versus values. One is that rules are external, they're taught to us. And that makes them also really easy to communicate. Like I get there's benefits to this. Makes it really clear, black and white. The same rules can apply to many different people. So rules are, if you don't do it this way, you're doing it wrong. And what I say is the difference for values is that values are they're internal. They come from your heart, they come from your core, they come from your soul. And so rules can tell you when you're doing it wrong. Values show you when you're doing it right. And that can only be something you know from yourself. And on a more like an analogy that I've come up with recently that I think works quite well is that rules is like painting by numbers. It tells you how to do it, and you can have something that looks kind of nice at the end, right? Whereas values is art. Values is expression. Values is getting to use the colors and create in a way that feels true to you. And if someone else doesn't agree and someone else doesn't like it, who cares? You're the artist that gets to express your creative expression. And so that's the difference that I see is that rules is that painting by art. We all kind of end up with something that looks relatively the same. Values allow us the space to actually create art, create expression, create something that feels true to you, true to me, true to each of us individually.
I love it. Okay, so you recently walked me through this process of articulating values around sensuality and sexuality. Are you willing to share, I mean, even one or all, you choose, of your values in this area of life, just to give people the example, right? I mean, I think values, it's like, it sounds great. I want to create art. What the hell are you talking about? So,
I
can you give us an example?
absolutely, and I will try to make this short, but I give an example by showing my artistic exercise and hoping that it helps. When I said that I needed to stop my sexual interactions with my partner, I was able to sit back and say, okay, what do I want my sexuality to look like? What do I want it to feel like? And Dawn, I sat on those questions for months. In fact, you and I had many conversations and you helped me tremendously with that. Like, what do I, and I started to get little glimpses of what those answers were. Like, I started to actually see a picture of what I wanted my sexuality to look like, to feel like. I had a picture, for example, of like coming down to write an email that I was so excited about. And I was writing it in this like beautiful lingerie. I had another moment where I could see myself feeling so completely loved in a sexual interaction with a partner. and just feeling like they were so tuned into me. Like the eye contact there was just let me know that the connection was there. So I started to like kind of have these snapshots of what my life could look like if I was really embodying my sexuality. And so I started to make notes of these things of like, I would be able to like make eye contact with my partner in a moment of lovemaking that felt like it, was otherworldly, like just would manifest this connection that felt like we were seeing each other's souls. um, I would be able to like not only be able to be excited about work, but I'd be able to be turned on by my work. Like it would be an expression of who I was and my creativity. So I started to like, this is what I did is I was just noticing these things and being like, wow, that would be so fun. That would be so great. Then the question came about eventually like, what what would I need to be embodying to have that? Like, what would I need? And so that's where the values conversation came. I kind of look at it like, what ingredients would I need in order to make that recipe? And so I recognized that I knew at the heart of everything I needed safety. I wouldn't be able to have that connection, that eye contact with my partner if I didn't feel completely safe and held in their presence. I knew that I needed to have honesty, both with myself and with the people in my life, because if I was not able to show up honestly of who I was, then I would continue to people please and adjust myself. And so that became a place, one of my North Stars is how honest am I being with myself, first and foremost? And then how honest am I being with the people that I'm allowing to be in my life? I'm letting have an influence in my life. How honest am I being with them? And another one of my values became presence. Again, like how present am I being in my life? What am I putting up with that I don't want to put up with? What am I putting up with in relationship that I don't want to put up with? Like how present am I being to myself, my experience, and what I want? And then the fourth was expansion. I curiosity, growth, play, all of that is so important to me. And so I was like, okay, how much am I allowing myself to expand? Because I want to expand, not because my partner is saying like, yeah, let's try this. Again, I'm not trying to say that there's anything wrong with listening and hearing your partner, but I had to metabolize it and see if it was true for me. And the only way to do that is to own that value of expansion together with presence and honesty and safety. And so far, those are the four values that I've come up for myself. Those have become my core values, my North Star that I take into my life, most definitely into my sexuality. So let's say that, um, as an example, I was turned on for years by a certain fantasy. And this fantasy was just like me being demeaned. I have no idea what there is to it, but like, some kink to it of like just kind of being essentially like almost like ignored in the sexual act, right? Of like, oh, like they're with me, but they're like actually being turned on by porn or they're being turned on by someone else as they are in a sexual act with me. Like this was a fantasy that I don't know how long I had it, but I would say it would come up at different times when I was, masturbating or when I was even with my partner, I would have that come to my mind. And once I had my values in place, I was able to sit there one day when that came to mind and I was like almost at orgasm. That thought came to my mind and it was like, ooh, that's not as safe. That's not as safe. Like to me, it just was like that doesn't feel true to me. Like that, I could recognize that. Say like, okay, circuits in my body, chemistry, hormones, whatever is happening. There's something that reacts to that gets turned on by that. My North Star says no, thank you. I don't want that any longer. It's kind of like the person who goes on a 30-day fast from gluten and was eating all the gluten before and said, I feel fine. And then takes a 30-day fast and someone, a 30-day break from gluten and someone puts a piece of cake in front of them and they're like, oh, my body says no. My body says that is no longer what it wants to have in it anymore. And that's what I think the values have helped me to do is that instead of me saying, should I or shouldn't I, I'm able to turn into those values and say, is this a yes or is this a no? And dare I say this, like there's other fantasies that I have that I probably would, might be as embarrassed to share. But at the end of the day, I'm like, no, those still fit my values. Those still turn me on. I'm great with those. I'm going to keep those, but I'm going to filter out the ones that feel like they don't feel completely true to me and the sexual identity that I want to continue to create.
So great. Really, what I hear in that is it's about your yes and your no. No one else's. And that this process of creating your own values has almost offered you a litmus test where you could just feel in. How does it check in with safety? How does it felt check in with expression? How does it check in with honesty? How does it check in with expansion? So then it's still a reference point, but to sort of come back to where we were before, it's an internal reference point rather than an external reference point.
Yes, and that's what I love about values is I feel like they're all so unique. And one of the things I like to say is I like having this conversation with people, but I can have it with someone who's a sex worker. I can have it with someone who is a devout Christian, like the, because it's personal, and we each get to cultivate an expression that is personal to us. That's our art. And when our sexuality gets to feel like our art, I don't think there's anything better than that.
Yes. Okay, so the last question that I want to ask you, because we're here really to explore this idea of the pleasure path, how you can have a life and body you love without restriction and deprivation and suffering. What I'm curious about is, like, as you have gotten more and more in touch with your own self, being internally guided, what has shifted in your experience of vitality, emotional health, mental health, physical health? Like, how have the other aspects of your life changed because you have made peace with pleasure?
And I can probably barely put it to words, but the person, I look back at the first truly 35, 40 years of my life, and that person was trying to look good, trying to appear as if they had it all together, when inside, chaos, anxiety, frustration, depression, it was like, just keep it bottled up. And now I feel like my life is the opposite. I think my life looks really good because it feels so good. And if it doesn't look good, it's almost like, that's okay because it didn't feel good to me to try to make it look like that, right? Like I'm so much more comfortable with actually being seen as who I am. And so pleasure fills my life now. Pleasure is a huge part of my life. Like if I notice anxiety, for example, when I wake up, which is still fairly common, like I'm not, I wake up and think, oh my goodness, I have all these things to do. And it used to be like, how come I didn't get, like again, like start castigating myself. And I was like, what do I need? I need to just breathe for another minute. I just need to like tune in and be like, I got this. Okay. Okay. I need to just like get outside for 5 minutes. Like the answers are so easy and so accessible once we know the questions to ask. Our body knows. Our body knows how to find pleasure, not in the world of the way, not in the way that the world is saying, do this, do this, do this, but in a way that feels true to us. And so my entire life has changed. I think I'm just, compassion isn't something that I see to be given out in the world now. Compassion is part of how I treat myself. I think I really appeared to be a compassionate person before. Now I am a compassionate person. I think I appeared to be a kind person before. Now I am a kind person. I think I appeared to be a happy person before, and now I am a happy person. So what changed is that my life looked good before, and now my life feels good because pleasure drives everything. And when something's not pleasurable, that's when I get to tune back into myself. Not so that I change myself from the outside in, but so that I evolve more from the inside out.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your vulnerability, your generosity, your transparency in sharing. I mean, this was a remarkable journey. And as you noted, it- various elements of it, I am quite confident, are reflected in every woman's journey. So I'm just really grateful to you for sharing your story, sharing your evolution and your wisdom with us.
Thank you so much, Sean.